The rain started 20 minutes before the Orphan docked, and it hadn't stopped since. That was 3 days ago. Keth Station got weather when the atmospheric processors needed cycling, which meant Keth Station got weather roughly every 6 weeks, and the rain lasted until the processors finished their business, which was never fewer than 3 days, and sometimes stretched to 5. Nobody had ever fixed this. I'd filed 4 maintenance requests in 11 years, and received 4 automated replies informing me that the request had been logged and prioritized accordingly. The rain collected in the gaps between the dock plates and ran off in brown rivulets toward the drainage channels on the south side, and if you didn't put a rubber seal under the base of your equipment crates, you'd find the lower tiers soaked through by morning. I knew the seal trick. I'd learned it the first month. I ran the supply and repair depot on the north apron of Keth Station's secondary docking ring. That meant I kept fuel cells in rotation. I ran a parts exchange for ships too small or too broke to call in a certified contractor. And I fixed things: atmospheric seals, cargo cranes, thruster housings, a landing strut here and there when someone came in hot. I had 2 hired hands, Moore and Sell, both human, both competent, neither one inclined to talk more than the job required. We got along fine. Keth Station sat at the edge of the Veth Transit Corridor, the kind of place ships stopped because it was cheaper than the next option, not because it was good. The permanent population was maybe 400 and change on any given week, plus whoever happened to be in dock. Velhari agricultural contractors used it as a staging point for runs into the outer systems. Kareva cargo haulers stopped for fuel and didn't stay. There was a small Doran administrative annex near the central hub, a fuel exchange, a commissary that served food I ate because it was there, and not because it was good, and a bar called The Latch that I visited on Fridays, if the week had been long enough to justify it. There was also Bracken. Bracken was 11 years old, which for a St. Bernard was the age when you started noticing things you hadn't noticed before, the gray coming in heavy around the muzzle, the longer pause before standing, the way he chose the exact warmest patch of floor and stayed there instead of following me from room to room the way he had at 4. He weighed 62 kilos. When he sat beside you, his head came to mid-chest on a standing adult. When he lay down across the doorway of the depot office, which was his preferred position between roughly 10 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon, Morey and Sell had developed the habit of stepping over him without comment, the same way you'd step over a familiar threshold. Nobody on Keth Station was frightened of Bracken. That was the correct response. He was a very old, very calm dog, who asked for very little: a walk in the mornings, his food, a hand on the back of his neck when he found you, the occasional afternoon where you sat on the dock edge and let him put his enormous gray head in your lap while the ships moved in and out. In 11 years, I had never heard him growl at anything that didn't deserve it. In 11 years, the list of things that deserved it was short. 2 people, 1 incident involving a Kareva cargo officer who got too loud, too fast with a dock worker I liked, and once, briefly, a rat. He was a good dog. He was my dog. That was the whole of it. I hadn't planned on getting a dog when I came to Keth. I'd come out here at 47 because the contract was straightforward and the work was concrete, and I needed both of those things at a time in my life when very little else was. My wife had died 2 years before fast, the way those things go when they go fast, and my son was grown and set and didn't need me underfoot, and the depot contract on Keth Station was 12 months, with a renewable clause that I'd now renewed 9 times. I brought Bracken at the end of the 2nd year because the nights were quiet in a way that had started to bother me, and a dog's breathing fills a room the way nothing else does. He had been a puppy then. He was not a puppy anymore. Neither was I. I am telling you all of this so you understand the kind of man I was when the Royal Envoy ship landed, and the kind of life I was living, and the fact that none of what I am about to tell you was anything I had thought about in a very long time. You forget things. In the regular march of a working day, you put things down, and you pick up the next thing. That is not a character flaw. That is how a person survives. The 2 girls were named Sene and Pia. I want to be precise about what I mean when I say girls. Because it matters. Sene was 9 years old when I met her, and Pia was 6. Sene was half Velhari on her mother's side, and full human on her father's, though I only learned that later. Pia was full human, but small for her age, with a quiet that wasn't shyness, so much as careful observation, the quiet of a child who has learned to read rooms before she commits to entering them. They had a mother, Dara, who had been working a transit contract rotation on Keth for 8 months when I arrived. She was thin and capable, and she brought the girls to the depot sometimes on Saturday mornings when she had paperwork at the administrative annex and no childcare, and she would leave them in the office with a bag of books and a firm set of instructions about not touching anything, and they didn't touch anything, and I didn't mind. Bracken was 3 then. He lay across the depot office doorway, and the girls ate their lunch on the floor beside him, and that was the arrangement for 4 Saturdays. Dara died on a Thursday, in my 3rd month on Keth Station. There was no drama in it. She had a cardiac anomaly that nobody had caught, and it caught itself on the dock during a routine offload, and by the time the station medic arrived it was already settled. Sene was at school in the station's education wing. Pia was with a neighbor 3 corridors down. I was in the depot doing a fuel cell calibration when Moore came to the door and told me, and I went to the administrative annex and identified myself as someone who knew the family, and I asked about the girls. The Kareva Transit Authority handled the station's administrative welfare cases. A woman named Pren, compact and efficient and not unkind, told me that the girls' nearest registered kin was a paternal uncle on a Colony 18 transit days out, that contact had been attempted, and that the uncle had not responded. She told me there was a staging protocol for unaccompanied minors. They would be held in the station welfare facility for up to 60 days, while kin contact was exhausted, and after that, formal placement would be sought through the Keth-Veth administrative circuit. She told me this in the tone of someone reciting a process that worked correctly, which it did, technically. I stood there for a moment. I thought about the depot office. I thought about Bracken lying across the doorway, and 2 small girls eating lunch beside him, and the way Pia had sat with her back pressed against his ribs and turned pages without looking up, and the way Sene had explained to me once, very seriously, that Bracken was the biggest dog she had ever seen, and she wanted to know everything about how big dogs were different from small dogs, which had led to a 40-minute conversation that I had not planned on having, and which ended with Sene deciding she would compile a research summary on St. Bernards that she would bring the following Saturday. She had brought it. It was 3 handwritten pages. I said, "I'll take them for now." Pren looked at me. She said the protocol required background verification and a registered residence notation and a minimum care standard assessment, all of which she could begin processing, and that it would take approximately 3 weeks to complete. I said, "I understand. I'll take them tonight. Start the processing." She started the processing. Senna and Pia came to the depot that Thursday. I gave Senna the bunk room behind the office, and I put a second cot in there for Pia, and I told them both that they were staying here for now, and that the depot was safe, and that Bracken slept near the door. I said it matter-of-factly because I am a matter-of-fact person, and because I believed that matter-of-fact was what they needed more than anything else at that moment. Sene looked at me with her mother's eyes, dark and level and measuring, and she nodded once. Pia looked at Bracken. Bracken walked to Pia and sat down in front of her. She put her arms around his neck. He did not move. That was the first night. That was how it started. I want to be careful not to make this into something it wasn't. I was not a natural at it. I was a 50-year-old man who had raised 1 child and been largely adequate at it, which is the most I would claim for myself, and that child was already an adult, and the lessons I remembered were not necessarily the ones that applied to a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old who had just lost their mother on a docking bay. I made mistakes. I cooked food that was wrong, and I scheduled meals at wrong times, and I said the wrong things on several occasions, not out of cruelty, but out of not knowing what the right things were. Sene corrected me when I was wrong, and tolerated me when I was approximately right. And Pia said almost nothing for the first 2 weeks, and then one morning said a great deal, all at once. And I sat at the depot office table and listened to all of it. And when she was done, I told her she was right about every part of it. And she nodded and went to sit with Bracken. The paperwork took 4 weeks instead of 3. The uncle was found, eventually the colony 18 days out, and he declined, not unkindly, citing 3 children of his own and a contracted commitment that he couldn't break. Pren filed the formal placement with the Kethveth Administrative Circuit, and I filed the counter-petition as provisional guardian. And the Kethveth Circuit, which had very little appetite for contested placements on a backwater station, approved the provisional guardianship after a review. I attended a loan and a home inspection. I cleaned the depot for 3 days to prepare for. During those 3 days of cleaning, Sene helped without being asked. She was methodical about it. She worked through the depot in sections, the way she did everything, and when she found things that needed organizing, she organized them. And when she found things that didn't have a place, she asked me where they should go, and I told her, and she put them there. Pia mostly followed Bracken around while this was happening, and reported back to Sene on things she found, which was its own kind of useful. The inspector was a Velhari contract officer named Sorev, calm and methodical, who spent 40 minutes examining the living quarters and the depot and the safety certifications on the equipment, and who then sat down at the office table and asked Sene, not me, 3 direct questions. Sene answered all 3 without hesitation and without embellishment, which I think was what Sorev was actually assessing. He wrote something down. The approval came through 6 days later. I kept the provisional. I kept renewing it every 8 months, because I never filed the permanent conversion, partly because I didn't know exactly how to, and partly because the girls never asked me to, and I didn't want to push anything on them that they hadn't requested. What we had was working. I didn't see the need to complicate it with paperwork they hadn't asked for. Bracken slept between their bunks every night for the first 8 months. Then he started moving back to the doorway after they were asleep, the way dogs do when they decide the watch can be maintained from a distance. I had noted this at the time and not given it much thought. A dog reading a room. That was what I'd called it. We fell into a routine. Routines, in my experience, are undervalued. They do more work than they are given credit for. The routine was breakfast at the depot table, Sene leaving for school first, Pia leaving 20 minutes after. Bracken's walk at 7 in the morning, before either of them was up, which was my time and his and nobody else's. Dinner at the depot table, which I made because cooking was a competency I had, and I applied it steadily, if not brilliantly. Sene did the dishes. Pia dried. I don't know when that arrangement started. It was simply what happened. On Fridays, I still went to the latch if the week had been long enough, and I started coming back earlier than I had before. Sene was the one who taught me that there were things about Velhari culture in the station's social fabric that I had not learned because I had never needed to learn them. She explained, with the focused clarity of a 9-year-old who has decided a person needs an education, that the Velhari agricultural contractors who docked at Keth operated under a system of household and house affiliation that governed everything from trade agreements to social precedents, and that the reason some of them had been cold to Dara over the years was that Dara's Velhari family affiliation was minor, and her human status was unaffiliated, and the combination put her in a social position that was technically documented but practically invisible. She told me this without apparent bitterness. She was telling me because she thought I should understand the context of the station I was working on. I understood it better for the telling. 4 years. That was how long we had. In the 5th year, Sene was 14, and a Velhari agricultural liaison office opened a youth apprenticeship track on Keth Station as part of a corridor expansion initiative, and Sene applied without telling me until the application was submitted. She told me after, sitting at the depot table with her hands flat on the surface the way she did when she'd already decided something and was telling me as a courtesy. I asked her 2 questions. She answered them fully. I said she should go ahead with it, and she nodded. and that was the conversation. The apprenticeship track ran for 2 years on station, and then transitioned to a posted placement in the Veth agricultural corridor. Seni left Keth at 16, with a Velhari ag contractor team, headed to Kareva station, and a duffel bag, and the 3-page research summary on St. Bernard's that she had kept in a folder since she was 9. I saw it sticking out of the bag when she packed. I didn't say anything about it. She didn't either. Pia was 12, and she stood at the dock with me, and we both watched the contractor transport clear the dock and bank away. And Pia said that Sene had told her she would write, and I said I knew. She wrote. She wrote regularly. She wrote to me, and to Pia, and, based on the letters I received, she was doing well. She had a posting, then a better posting, then a title I didn't fully understand, but which Pren, who was still on Keth, and had developed an unexpected fondness for following the girls' careers, as a kind of personal project, told me was a Tier 2 agricultural administration role under House Veteran sponsorship, which was not nothing. I filed the letters in the top drawer of the depot office desk, and I didn't think about what they added up to. Pia stayed until she was 15, and then got herself enrolled in a Kareva Transit Corps apprenticeship through a contact she'd made entirely on her own, a Velhari transit officer named Das, who had stopped at Keth on a resupply run and ended up in the depot, waiting out an equipment delay, during which time Pia had asked him 47 questions about transit certification pathways, in a tone so methodical and persistent that he had handed her an application form and told her to fill it out. She filled it out that evening and gave it back to him the next morning, before his ship cleared the dock. She left 3 months later with a transit corps placement and a carry case that weighed more than she did, and Bracken walked her to the dock and sat down at the boarding gate and watched her go. She was crying when she boarded. She'd stopped crying by the time she reached the top of the ramp, because she was Pia, and she did not show things longer than she had decided they needed to be shown. Bracken was not crying. He watched the ship until it cleared the dock, and then he turned and walked back to the depot and resumed his position in the doorway. I drove back to the depot and went back to work. Bracken lay across the doorway and went to sleep. That was 12 years ago. I am going to tell you what the next 12 years were. Quiet, steady, and mostly fine. Pia wrote when she could, which was less often than Sene but more often than I expected, and her letters were short and specific and occasionally funny, which was more than I'd expected when she was 6 and barely talking. She had a Tier 3 transit commission under House Veteran again. Pren translated this for me, which meant she had formal professional status under a Velhari noble house, which was the kind of thing you apparently worked toward for a decade. I was glad for her. I filed the letters. I kept the filing simple. 1 drawer for Sene, 1 for Pia, newest on top. I did not reread them often, but I did not throw them away. That was a decision I made without thinking about it, which is sometimes how the right decisions get made. Sene visited once, at 22, with a colleague I was briefly introduced to and didn't catch the name of, and she sat in the depot office for 2 hours and talked about everything that wasn't the hard thing, and then at the end, she said she wanted me to know that she had told the girls on her team that they should always register a provisional guardian if they had one, because it mattered in Velhari kinship law in ways that people from outside the system didn't know about, and she looked at me when she said it. I didn't know what she was telling me. I thanked her for coming. She scratched Bracken behind both ears for a long time before she left. Bracken put his head in her lap while she did it. He recognized her. Dogs do that. They remember the ones who leaned against them in the dark. I am not a person who looks for meaning in things. I find meaning is often assigned retroactively to events that were, at the time, simply events. I fixed things. I kept the depot running. I filed paperwork when I needed to, and ignored paperwork when I could. Bracken got older, and so did I. And the depot stayed the same, and Keth Station stayed the same. And the atmospheric processors cycled every 6 weeks, and the rain came, and then stopped, and then came again. And that was a life, and it was mine, and I was not unhappy with it. Moore's daughter came to work a summer rotation one year when she was 19, and she reminded me, briefly and without intending to, of Sene at a similar age, not in any specific way, just in the general quality of someone who had decided to be competent at things and was carrying out that decision quietly. I didn't tell Moore this. It wasn't the sort of thing you told people. I just noted it, the way you note the return of the rain. The Royal Envoy ship was a Velhari House veteran formal transport. I know this now. At the time I saw it come in through the rain on the second day of the cycle, I saw a ship I didn't recognize making an unscheduled approach on the north apron, which was my apron, which meant if something went wrong with its landing, it was my problem. I stood up from the fuel manifold I was calibrating and went to the dock entrance and watched it come down. It was not a large ship. House formal transports aren't built for size, they're built for a specific kind of weight. The architectural weight of arriving correctly, which means clean lines and a particular kind of stillness in the approach that working cargo haulers don't have. It set down on Dock 7 with a precision that told me the pilot knew exactly where they were going and had probably been told in advance, which meant someone at Keth Station Administration had cleared the approach without telling me, which was the kind of thing that happened when someone above the station's usual clearance tier asked for a dock, and the station administrator didn't want to have a conversation about it. Moore came to stand beside me. He looked at the ship, and then looked at me, and I looked at the ship. Not a cargo run, Moore said. No, I agreed. Bracken had been asleep in the office doorway. He wasn't anymore. He walked past both of us, moving the way he moved when he had a specific destination, not fast, but with the kind of deliberateness that takes up more space than the speed would suggest. He walked to the edge of the dock, past the safety line I had chalked 6 years ago and Moore and Sel had always respected, and he sat down and faced the ship and watched the boarding ramp deploy. I should tell you what the ramp deploying looked like. It was formal. Everything about what the ship did was formal in a way that working ships aren't there, was a deliberateness to the sequence. Each stage completing before the next began, the way a sentence does when the person saying it has decided that every word will be placed exactly. The ramp extended. It locked. A light on the side of the hull changed from amber to white. 4 Velhari came down the ramp. The 2 in front were escort officers. I recognized the armor class. The gray and silver house livery. Formal protective detail. Not combat. The 2 behind them were different. One was young, maybe mid-20s by Velhari reckoning, wearing the administrative coat that meant junior attaché, and behind him was the one who had to be in charge. Tall. Old. By the look of the lines in the pale skin. Old the way Velhari get old, which is slowly, and then all at once. He wore a coat I didn't know the rank of, but which had the kind of fall to it that means it was made for one person, and fitted once, not printed in a batch. The escort officers came down the ramp and they saw Bracken. I want to be precise about what happened. I have thought about this a great deal in the months since, and I want to be honest about it. The escort officers did not panic. They were professionals and they didn't panic. What they did was stop, at the bottom of the ramp, with the particular quality of stillness. That isn't the stillness of someone who has decided to stay still. It's the stillness of someone who has been told by something deeper than decision to not move. Their hands, which had been at their sides, went to their sides more explicitly. Their feet found a wider stance, without them appearing to decide on it. Bracken sat in the rain and looked at them. He was not doing anything threatening. He was an 11-year-old Saint Bernard, sitting in the rain on a docking bay, with his enormous gray head held level, and his eyes open, and his tail doing a single slow wag every several seconds that wasn't enthusiasm. Exactly, just acknowledgement. He looked the way he always looked, old and calm, and aware of everything in the vicinity. The escort officers did not come further down the ramp. The senior envoy came down behind them and around them in a single, unhurried step, the way a person moves when they understand that a pause has occurred and intend to address it directly. He came to the base of the ramp, and he stopped in front of Bracken. and he looked at Bracken for a moment with an expression I couldn't read from where I was standing. Then he brought both hands out from his sides, palms open, at a level slightly below his chest. I didn't know what that was. I know now. It is the Velhari kinship greeting, the one reserved for acknowledged companions and house-recognized persons. The hand's visible position is a formalization of a gesture that goes back a very long way in Velhari social history. And it means, I come without concealment, and I acknowledge your standing. He gave that greeting to my dog. Bracken looked at him for a long moment. Then Bracken shifted his weight just slightly, just enough, and yawned. The yawn was not dismissive. It was the yawn of an old dog who has assessed a situation and found it acceptable. His jaw opened and closed, and his tongue came out briefly, and he settled, and his tail wagged again, once. The escort officers unfroze. Both of them. The junior attaché had been standing very still on the ramp above this entire exchange. I heard him say something quietly, in Velhari, and I caught one word. I recognized the word that means companion, which I'd learned from Sene's early letters when she was still explaining Velhari terminology to me the way she explained everything, directly, with examples. The senior envoy turned and looked toward the depot entrance, where I was standing, and our eyes met across 30 meters of rain-wet dock. I went out to meet him. Bracken stood up when I got to him, the long, unhurried stand of a heavy dog, and fell in beside me. He walked with his shoulder against my left leg, which was where he walked when he'd decided we were doing something together. I put my hand on the back of his neck for a moment. He was wet from the rain. I was getting wet. The senior envoy said something in Velhari. The junior attaché Denvel, I learned later. That was his name said in standard. Senior royal emissary Corvin, Tale of House Vethrin. Third formal transit. Keth Station North Apron. Seeking Del Cora. Provisional Guardian. Registry reference Keth Veth case record. 714 Cora. I said, that's me. Corvin Thale looked at me the way people look at you when they've been told something about you and are now calibrating the description against the fact. I don't know what he'd been told. I was wearing depot coveralls, and I needed a haircut, and I had a small grease mark on my left forearm that I'd been meaning to deal with since 7 that morning. He said something in Velhari, and Denvel translated. The senior emissary thanks you for receiving him. He asks if there is somewhere appropriate to speak. I looked at the depot. I looked at the dock. The rain was coming down steadily, and the atmospheric processors had at least another day in them. The office, I said. Come in. We went inside. Bracken went in first, which is what he always did, and took up his position across the office doorway, and the 2 escort officers stopped outside it and looked at each other with the expression of people who have been given an obstacle they have decided not to argue with. Moore, bless him, had already moved the extra stool from the corner to beside the desk, and he left without being asked, and Sel left with him, and I sat down behind the desk, and Corvin Tile sat on the stool, and Denvel stood to his left with a document tablet in his hands. Corvin Tile placed both hands flat on his knees. He spoke in Velhari at a measured pace, pausing after each section for Denvel to translate. This is what he said. Under Velhari House kinship law, specifically, the Provisional Guardianship Recognition Act, which had been amended in the Veth Administrative Session 11 years ago, and which applied to all cases filed through the Keth Veth Administrative Circuit, any individual who had held provisional guardianship of a PEAS, house-registered minor for a continuous period of no fewer than 4 years, was entitled to formal house recognition of that guardianship status. This recognition conferred a secondary kinship designation within the house, not hereditary, not rank-bearing, but formally registered and permanently maintained in the house record. It meant, among other things, that the guardian's name would appear in the house kinship register alongside the minor's record, and that the house acknowledged a debt of care that it considered binding. Sene Cora was currently serving as a Tier 2 agricultural administrator under House Vethrin sponsorship and had been house registered since her 3rd year of apprenticeship. Pia Cora was currently holding a Tier 3 transit commission under House Veteran sponsorship and had been House registered since her second year of transit service. Both had been House registered for over 7 years. The provisional guardianship I had filed had run for 4 years and 2 months before Senna's departure, and 4 years and 2 months was above the threshold. I should have received an automated notification from the Keth-Veth Administrative Circuit when the recognition became applicable. I had not received one. Denvel, without looking up from his tablet, said that an administrative audit had found that the notification had been filed to an address code that no longer existed, and that this was an error on the part of the circuit processor, and that the House had become aware of the lapse 8 months ago, when Senni had made a formal inquiry. House Veteran did not issue recognition by document alone. It sent an emissary. Corvin Thale had come personally, rather than delegating, because the case record was of a particular type that he personally handled cases involving children who had been in circumstances of administrative precarity, where the care given had been given without knowledge of the legal framework and therefore without expectation of acknowledgement. He had a phrase for these cases, which Denvel translated as, care given in plain sight, without a file. I sat there for a moment. I said, both girls are well? Corvin Thale replied. Denvel translated, both are well. Sene sends her formal regards through the house. Pia sends her formal regards and asks that I personally tell you that she has passed her deep corridor transit certification, which she says you will understand the significance of. I understood the significance of it. She'd been trying for deep corridor certification for 3 years. I had 2 letters about it. The first, describing the exam structure, the second describing the first failed attempt in language so dry and precise that you would have thought she was reporting on someone else's failure, which was how Pia handled the things that cost her most. I said, I'm glad. Corvin Thale spoke again. Denvel looked at his tablet and then translated more carefully, which meant it was something he wanted to get right. The senior emissary says that in 31 years of this work, he has handled 412 cases of this category. He says that in his experience, the cases that produce the best outcomes share one consistent feature, which is that the guardian in question never thought of themselves as performing a notable act. They considered it ordinary. He says that he has found this to be, in fact, the most reliable indicator of durable care. He says it is his honor to deliver the recognition in person. I looked at Bracken in the doorway. Bracken was looking at Corvin Thale with a soft, calm attention that he gave to things he had decided were worth watching. The recognition, I said. What does it actually consist of? Denvel translated the question. Corvin Thale replied. Denvel said, your name will be entered in the House Veteran Kinship Register under the guardianship designation, adjacent to the records of Sene Cora and Pia Cora. You will receive a formal notice of entry, which constitutes the record. You will also receive the House Acknowledgement Token, which is a physical object you are not required to do anything with it, but its existence in your possession constitutes the permanent acknowledgement. He paused. And there is one more thing, which the senior emissary asks permission to deliver directly. I said he could. Corvin Thale reached into the inner pocket of his coat and removed a folded document, actual paper, which is what the Velhari use for things they intend to be permanent, and set it on the desk in front of me. He spoke. Denvel translated. The senior emissary says that before he left on this transit, both Sene and Pia were asked if they wished to send any message that was not part of the formal record. Sene's message was included in the formal record and will be read as part of the recognition. Pia asked that the senior emissary deliver a specific message directly, and not as part of the formal document. He paused again. She asked that he say it to you in plain language, because she said you preferred plain language. I do, I said. Denvel translated whatever Corvin Thale said next. He translated it carefully, and I am going to try to give it to you the way I received it, as close as I can get. Pia had asked the senior emissary to tell me that when she was 6 years old and she came to the depot on a Thursday night that was the worst night of her life, She had been afraid of everything, of the depot, of the station, of what was going to happen, of me, and of everything that came after that night in a chain she couldn't see the end of. She had been afraid of everything except one thing. The one thing she had not been afraid of was Bracken. She said that Bracken had walked up to her on that first night and sat down, and that she had put her arms around him, and that for the first time since her mother died she had not been afraid. She said that in the years after, when things were uncertain or difficult, when she was learning the Transit Corps certification process, which was hard, or when she was posted somewhere new, which was disorienting, or when she was alone in a way that reminded her of being 6 on a Thursday night, she thought about the weight of Bracken's head and the specific quality of stillness he had, the way he made a room feel like a room rather than an emergency, and it helped. She said it had helped more times than she could count. She said she had never told me this because at the time she was 6 and didn't have the language for it, and later she had assumed I knew, and later still, she had wondered if I knew, but worried that saying it might change something. She wanted to stay the way it was, and then, it had been so long, that saying it felt strange, and she was telling me now because she wanted me to know, and she had decided that knowing it was better than not knowing it, even if it was late. She asked Corvin Tail to please tell Bracken as well, if that was an appropriate thing to do. I sat behind the desk for a moment. The rain was coming down outside, and the atmospheric processors were doing their work somewhere in the station infrastructure, and Bracken was in the doorway, and Corvin Tail was sitting on the stool across from me with his hands on his knees and the expression of a man who has delivered a great many things to a great many people and has learned to be quiet afterward. I looked at Bracken. I said, "Bracken." He turned his head toward me. I said, "Pia says thank you." He looked at me for a moment with his dark, steady eyes. Then he dropped his chin onto his forepaws and let out a slow, settling breath, the way he did when the situation had been attended to, and he was satisfied with the outcome. Corvin Tail said something quietly. Denvell didn't translate it immediately. He wrote something on his tablet first, carefully, and then he said, "The senior emissary says, noted. It will be included in the case record." The formal reading of the recognition took 20 minutes. Denvell read it from the tablet in both Velhari and Standard, section by section, each section twice, which was the formal house protocol. Denvell explained. For any recognition read in a location outside a house administrative chamber, the text was precise and formal and longer than I expected, because Velhari house kinship language is layered in a way that Standard isn't, and some of what it was saying had no direct equivalent. So Denvell translated it in 2 passes, once for the legal meaning, and once for what he called the social weight, which was the register of the acknowledgement within the house's understanding of what care meant and where it stood in their accounting of things. The section on Bracken was 3 lines. Denvell read it without comment, and then paused and said, without looking up, "The companion of the provisional guardian is noted in the kinship record as a companion of acknowledged standing within the household. This is standard notation for a guardian's registered companion. House Veteran does not leave standing things unrecorded." I thought about Bracken walking to Pia on the first night and sitting down. At the end, Corvin Tail signed the document on the desk and passed the stylus to me, and I signed it as well. And Denvell affixed the house seal, which was a physical impression in the paper that made a sound like something being decided. The acknowledgement token was a small thing, a flat disc of a dark material I didn't recognize, about the width of my palm, with the house glyph on one face and nothing on the other. Corvin Tail set it on the desk beside the document. I picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. I asked, because I wanted to understand. Sene knew about the recognition law. She told me about provisional guardianship when she visited. She wasn't telling me to file for permanent conversion. She was telling me that the recognition already existed. Denvell translated. Corvin Tail looked at me and replied, and Denvell said, "He says yes. He says she had been waiting for the administrative notification to reach you for 3 years before she made the formal inquiry." He says she did not want to interfere with the formal process. He says this is consistent with what the house knows of her character. I thought about Sene sitting at the depot table with her hands flat on the surface, telling me that people should register their provisional guardians because it mattered in Velhari kinship law in ways people didn't know. Telling me as a courtesy, after she'd already decided. The way she always had, since she was 9. I put the disc in my pocket. We walked Corvin, Tile, and Denvel, and the escort officers back to the ship in the rain. Bracken walked with us to the base of the ramp. He sat down there, in the rain, and he looked at the ship the way he'd looked at it when it arrived, calm and settled, and with the quality of attention that never hurried. Corvin Tail turned at the base of the ramp and placed his hands open at chest height again, as he had when he arrived, and this time, I understood what he was doing, and I put my own hands out in the same position, because I didn't have a better response, and it seemed right. He inclined his head. He went up the ramp. Denvel paused at the base for a moment. He looked at Bracken, and then at me. He said, in standard, without translating, "I have done this work for 9 years. I have never seen the senior emissary give the companion greeting to an animal before today. I thought you should know that." I said I was glad to know it. He went up the ramp. The escort officers went up. The ramp drew back. The light changed from white to amber. I stood there with Bracken, and we watched the ship lift. It cleared the dock and banked south, and the rain closed behind it. And then there was just the dock, and the rain, and the atmospheric processors doing their work. I sat down on the dock edge. It was wet. I sat down anyway, because my knees had decided they were done with the last hour, and I wasn't going to argue with them. Bracken came and stood beside me for a moment, and then he sat down, and then he folded himself down onto the dock, the slow, careful way he did now, the 11-year-old way, and he put his gray head in my lap. He was vet. I was vet. The rain came down, and the dock smelled of fuel, and the atmospheric processors would be done in another day or so, and then the rain would stop, and Keth Station would be dry for another 6 weeks, and then it would rain again, and that was Keth Station, and that was fine. I put my hand on the back of his neck. I had not been a notable person, and I had not done a notable thing. I had been a 50-year-old man with a depot and a dog and a Thursday evening with nowhere better to be, and 2 small girls had needed somewhere to sleep, and it had seemed like the obvious thing. It had not seemed like a choice. It had seemed like what you did when it was Thursday night, and it was raining, and the alternative was unacceptable. I thought about Pia at 6, her arms around Bracken's neck, not afraid. I thought about Senna at 14, with her hands flat on the table, already decided. I thought about the 3-page research summary on St. Bernard's in the pocket of her duffel bag. I thought about the way she had told me, at 22, to register provisional guardians, if you had them, in the tone of a person telling you something you already technically knew but hadn't understood yet. I thought about 12 years of filed letters in the top drawer of the depot desk, and the deep corridor certification Pia had just passed, and Sene running a Tier 2 agricultural administration program under a house I'd never heard of before today, and 412 cases that Corvin Tail had spent 31 years delivering in person, and the sound the seal had made on the paper. Bracken's breathing was slow and even. He weighed 62 kilos, and he had been doing this, putting his head in my lap on the dock edge, in the rain, at the end of difficult things since he was 2 years old, and I'd had one of those evenings where the quiet got too large. He'd known, the way he always knew. I had never taught him that. He simply did it because it needed doing. I put my hand in my pocket and felt the disc, heavier than it looked. I sat there with my dog on the dock while the rain came down, and the acknowledgement token was in my pocket, and the receipt had been delivered, and that was that.